video called Lessons from the Cultural Revolution.
Line countries. China during the Cultural Revolution.
And then after that, I will do the fun, despite technological limitations, Cuba's gaming space. And then after that, we'll get to the fun videos. Okay, here. Fun video time. We got the offline TV. We got the offline TV fear and collab. I'm very excited about that. They really said college campuses? What? I mean, that is a valid place to organize. It's true. College campuses are where people organize. Holy fuck, 7 hours, 300K views already. God damn. Dude, OTV is cooking them. Skip to no pixel, please, guys. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. God. I'm trying so hard not to be fucking angry, okay? Please, 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 just calm down, man. Calm down, please. It's okay, man. It's okay. You will be fine, okay? Just wait up. Yes, I would love to do another offline video. Yes, I'm gonna do Okay Buddy after this too, before I forget.
Represented something radically different from this model. Second, and most important,
like I love my gaming frogs. Okay, I love you. I cherish you. But you also have to remember you are a sliver of this. You're only but a sliver of this audience. Okay. You yell all the time. But there's no group of individuals in this community that gets this much fucking space. And like, I love gaming, and I love having a gaming audience, which is why I don't want to yell at you too much. But the reality is, there are a lot of people. You like everything, okay? Gaming frogs, you like everything. There are people, however, who are just incredibly fucking anti-gaming. Okay? That's the major problem. Gaming frogs like variety. And they yell about gaming a lot because under the variety banner, they don't get enough gaming. But there are people in here that don't like variety, that would just fucking despise any other type of content from being shown.
Importantly,
just like there are people who are news-only frogs, and I don't fucking feed them all day. There's a point in time where I tell them to fuck off. There's a point in the week where I tell them to fuck off extra hard. Right?
I believe that the Cultural Revolution contains some of the most sobering lessons for people on the left. In fact, many of the lessons of the Cultural Revolution are directly relevant to some of the issues that we still face today, which are hot topics in contemporary discourse. While some of you may have been able to already infer a verdict of your own based on what you saw in the last video, I don't think the lessons of the Cultural Revolution are exactly obvious. Far from it. This was the question that I left my readers with in the essay that I wrote on the Cultural Revolution titled Totalitarianism or Anarchy, published in the book titled Underground Theory. In this video, which essentially serves as a much shorter sequel to my previous mini-documentary on the Cultural Revolution, I will reveal my personal opinions and interpretation that I have come to regarding the events of the Cultural Revolution, which I was not able to fully articulate in that essay. As a result, this sequel video won't exactly be as mass appeal compared to my others, but I believe it will be among the most unique and useful for those who take emancipatory politics seriously and want to play a role in changing the world for the better. This is part 2. The final part of the one-time series on the Cultural Revolution.
This is not necessarily about cultural revolution in general, but instead, what are important
Lessons
takeaways?
Of the Cultural Revolution's failure. The real failure of the Cultural Revolution was not just that it created chaos, as some degree of instability would have been inevitable when undergoing such a radical socialist transformation. Rather, its real failure was that it did not fulfill its original aim of producing democratic political institutions that might have permitted the masses to maintain control over the means of production and eventually bring about their own emancipation and the emancipation of society as a whole. While such a colossal task is undoubtedly difficult and would have taken a long time, the end product of the Cultural Revolution ended up.
I know it pisses you off, but I do get a kick out of it when News Frog comes to the stream 6 hours and he goes, "Oh, I guess you don't care about the genocide in Gaza, huh?" After you were covering it the entire stream and moved on. Yeah. Those people I want to fucking drop ship directly into a conflict zone, active conflict zone. There is nothing more frustrating to me than that. That type of motherfucker.
Being the explosion of capitalist relations. The aftermath of the Cultural Revolution created a widespread political exhaustion.
So snarky, which is ironic because what we're watching right now directly pertains to that type of behavior, as a matter of fact. These people who are they have a lens of the world that is like not human and completely directed by whatever kind of fucking purity that they ascribe to my news coverage. And that same purity spiral is something that you will see in the Cultural Revolution. Motherfuckers come in here and go, all right, it's time for a struggle session. Let's do it. It's time for a struggle session. You have not sufficiently defended Palestine today. Is it because you have given up on the Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, third worldist principles that you originally started and developed a career off of? Is that what is going on?
That made it easier for the party cadres who superseded Mao to re-centralize state power and take the capitalist road. Precisely what Mao wanted to prevent. Literally Mao's worst nightmare. But the failure of the Cultural Revolution can't merely be blamed on Mao's decision to side with the party state in turning against the independent organizations and calling the military to stop their revolts. The Red Guard movement's descent into violent factional power struggles created a calamity that allowed the PLA, with Mao's consent, to frame themselves as the agents of order against the agents of disorder. But the question still remains. What led to the implosion of the independent organizations? The Cultural Revolution and the independent organizations that initially blossomed during the first 2 years of the Cultural Revolution imploded from the inside due to unresolved contradictions that still plague many political movements to this day. Creation versus negation. The politics of dismissal and pluralization. As brilliantly articulated by the theorist Alessandro Russo in his book Cultural Revolution and Revolutionary Culture, the implosion of the Cultural Revolution was by and large the result of a tension that was there from the very beginning. A contradiction between two different registers of politics, dismissal and pluralization, in which dismissal ended up winning out. Dismissal is what one could call a statist or an authoritarian logic that involves the desire to occupy positions of power that allow one to rule other people. The psychology of dismissal involves the enjoyment in deciding the fate of others. Dismissal is sort of like that cop in your head. This is the behavioral dynamic at play in almost every case of power struggles within the state. While dismissal is a rule of thumb,
like for example, I will use the Hasanabi Discord. I've long talked about how I wanted the Discord to be yours and yours only. I wanted to ensure that the Discord in and of itself would be a place for learning. Place for people to dive deeper into leftist theory. Place where there will be, just like in this community, in the Twitch chat, where there are going to be microaggressions. People that are coming in and asking certain questions. Some of those questions will be, come across as harmful. The fact that we got to this point in this community over the course of so many years, through so much back and forth, so much chaos, is because there were multiple instances where I had to tell people to dial it the fuck back and not be so unimaginably pure. Okay? I feel like there has been It's been a long time. It's been a long time since we had one of these conversations where people would consider even a microaggression to be completely unimaginably unacceptable. You cannot have a microaggression. That's racism. Like, that is, it's destroying the safe space that I thought this Discord was supposed to be, or I thought the Hasanabi chat was supposed to be. I never said that the chat was a safe space. I never said that the Discord was a safe space. It is not. It is supposed to be a space where there are people that are coming in to learn, because the broad majority of the population do not have the same kinds of attitudes and opinions that you do. The world is built on top of structures that you understand as reactionary. White supremacy thrives in America. America's built on the foundational principles of white supremacy and proto-capitalism and genocide of the indigenous population. So therefore, obviously, the prevailing narratives are going to reinforce that structure. And therefore, the people that learn from these institutions are going to repeat some of those values, whether they recognize it or not. And the goal for reform, or the goal for rehabilitation, should always be to be as kind as you possibly can be. Okay? To be as kind as you physically, humanly can be to those who are genuinely interested in learning. If you shut people off, and there was back in the day, for example, in like 2018, 2019, there was a lot of discourse around emotional labor. Emotional labor. People love talking about emotional labor. You're making me do emotional labor. And it's like, yeah, I do. I want you to do it. I mean, a big part of why I do what I do is so that you don't have to do emotional labor, or as much emotional labor. But yeah, if you have the capacity to do so, you should. Everyone else takes for granted and going, isn't this normal and good? We should do more of that. So obviously what they're doing is not emotional labor, because in most instances, they're not also directly impacted by white supremacy. They oftentimes are white themselves. So yeah, it's just that was another concept that people would recycle all the fucking time. So anyway, my point is that kind of attitude leads to a more insulated community. And I don't want that. I want this to be as broad a community as possible. Obviously, that doesn't mean that there is boundaryless free speech run amok here, where you could just like come in and spam the N-word or whatever, or genuinely say racist, transphobic, misogynistic shit. You can't do that. You can't get away with that. Right? But ultimately, that kind of purity spiral was very much prominent in this community, and it still is to a certain degree. It's ironic that I've been yelled at quite a bit by trans chatters, or just like trans content creators sometimes, or not even necessarily trans content creators, but like trans Twitter, let's say, of not being sufficiently pro-trans. Which is, of course, like a laughable notion. If you've been in here, you know that that is a laughable notion. But part of that always has been because I am not making commentary on the trans issue, okay, for trans people. When I talk about trans issues, I'm talking to transphobes. And something that I've always stressed for people, okay, for specifically my trans chatters who know this already, because we've talked about this so much, is that the reason why you can come in here and enjoy a safe, relatively safe space that is full of tens of thousands of different people, right? Knowing full well that the mods have your back, knowing full well that this community has your back, is because there are plenty of people that were transphobic that came in here and unlearned that shit. So that's why whenever I yell at like a particular trans chatter or whatever, and that shit gets like clipped out of context and people try to fucking use that as a way to say like you're transphobic, those are outside wreckers trying to play that exact same role in this community. I've yelled at you in here before, but that was years ago. I've been watching you long enough to know by now that you're trying to meet stupid transphobic people on their level, not engage in super insular discourse. Yeah.
In political affairs, there are also egalitarian exceptions, where those who are usually in the position of being governed begin to self-organize and create egalitarian relations for themselves, separate from existing state hierarchies and practices. The term Rousseau uses to describe this process is pluralization. The sequence of pluralization during the Cultural Revolution occurred mainly between the first 2 years, when the revolution saw the construction of various novel forms of egalitarian projects that we discussed earlier. However, the Cultural Revolution showed us that dismissal and the enjoyment of dominating others carries over outside of the state. For Rousseau, the triumph of dismissal over pluralization played an integral role in the Cultural Revolution's demise into factionalism, in which arbitrary splits and power struggles led to the implosion of these egalitarian organizations. The word implosion is key. These organizations self-destructed without the state needing to break them up. Authoritarianism without authorities. Now, one would think that the spontaneous creation of egalitarian organizations that were independent from the state would lead to a more anti-authoritarian movement. Authoritarianism is a phenomenon typically associated with the state. However, during the Cultural Revolution, as the galvanized masses were handed power to rebel, many people acted exactly like states themselves, engaging in similar dominating behaviors and getting enjoyment out of it.
This literally is the Chaz Chop phenomena. A democratically organized, hyper-localized community still ends up recreating the same structures that exist in society at the state level, and it still leads to like black teenagers being shot and killed. Now I know people that were there will say, well, those guys were fucking harassing the population and stealing their shit. Okay? But I'm sorry, you cannot tell me that an entire supposedly anarchist organized space as protest against police brutality, which disproportionately targets black people, ended up literally having some kind of police militia force comprised of civilians that ended up killing black teenagers that were causing a ruckus is not like ironic in any way.
This pleasure in controlling the lives of others is seen in the endless examples of how people policed each other during the Cultural Revolution, in a process that resembled medieval witch hunting. The key takeaway from all of this is that the logic of dismissal, the enjoyment in deciding the fate of others, is not a mentality exclusive to those who pursue politics as a career in the state. The practice of dismissal is a typical feature of politics as usual within the government. But the fact that the practice of dismissal was weaponized by the masses themselves against each other outside of the state is emblematic of an overlooked dilemma that many people, especially on the left, overlook, being that policing can still occur without official police, that authoritarianism can still occur without state authorities. The mentality of dismissal was a major factor as to why the Cultural Revolution devolved into a self-destructive politics of pure negation,
Someone said, was that Elon Musk? And it always leads me to my my, I guess not favorite, but like a funny part of discourse, that I'm a firm believer that Elon Musk looks kind of Chinese, just like Barack Obama looks kind of Indonesian. I don't know what it is. When you get it, you get it. Well, the Barack Obama thing, I'm sure you've seen at this point. Barack Obama is our first Indonesian president. Okay, that one felt racist. You've never seen Indonesian Barack Obama? His mom and stepdad actually brought him to Indonesia during his childhood. He actually lived there. Obama's so good they made Obama 2 and Pussy 2.
Rather than creation, seen by the preoccupation with the destruction of old elements, supposed class enemies, and the moral policing of each other, which ended up overpowering the experimentation with new political forms separate from state structures.
Is it Kenya or is it Indonesia? Time to make up our damn minds. Well, you know, he's Muslim. He's either Muslim Kenyan or Muslim Indonesian. You know what I mean? You have ran into what? I ran into Indian Trump. Oh. I have seen this one before. That's the craziest one.
And the logic of dismissal re-emerged in the form of a factional struggle whereby the priorities of independent organizations were reduced to different Red Guard factions trying to seize power and eliminate their rival factions. Instead of maintaining independence from the party state, groups fought each other over political or military supremacy, often in the form of dominance over different areas of the country. Alessandro Russo brilliantly illustrates the problem with dismissal, the politics of negation, and how it can hinder the politics of creation.
What I have called the dismissal process did not involve any real political experimentation. It was intrinsically in line with the seizure of power, whose synonym ultimately was dismissal. One takes power when one dismisses another from power. Dismissal is what governmental subjects of all times and countries have always practiced. The fact that in the case of socialism, it was argued in the name of communist and egalitarian revolutionary principles only served to make its function more ambiguous. However, dismissal is not at all transitive to egalitarian experimentation, as the Cultural Revolution dramatically demonstrated. When the processes of egalitarian mass invention established their objectives around the seizure of power, meaning the dismissal of certain powers and their replacement by others, those inventions annihilated themselves. Indeed, they served as a lever for a change of hands between powerful entities that did not know what to do with egalitarian political experimentation. The unresolved problem that the Cultural Revolution left behind was, first of all, how to find and maintain the necessary political distance between the two processes.
One can interpret this tension between dismissal and the politics.
So this is an Irish accent in case you didn't know. Efendim. Neyi? Hayır, sen söyle. Söyle.
Politics of creation in different ways. For Alessandro Russo, the fact that so many rebels ended up adopting the practice of dismissal, what was normally a statist logic, was directly linked to the party state's interference in the movement and its overbearing role in Chinese society as a whole. Rousseau argues that the party state's attempts to manage the conditions of the Cultural Revolution and contain it prompted the rebel organizations to start orienting their objectives around the seizure of power rather than focusing on productive experiments outside of the state. Recall that the Cultural Revolution originally began with purges from above, first seen in the Hyrule affair. One could argue, as Rousseau does, that the masses of rebels later emulated this logic of dismissal against each other. Mao tried to promote both pluralization and dismissal at once. On the one hand, Mao encouraged the blossoming of independent egalitarian organizations. But as these rebel organizations became more fractured and anarchic, Mao and the CCRG urged the different rebel organizations who had begun to splinter to instead unify and overthrow the revisionist forces amongst the state bureaucracy. But this backfired. Because Mao and the CCRG ended up framing the Cultural Revolution as a seizure of power from revisionist authorities, this implanted a certain logic into the different Red Guard groups that primed them to turn on each other and seize power from one another. The key lesson here is that the primary mission of a socialist revolution should be based on what it wants to build rather than just what it wants to destroy. This begs the question, if we are to subscribe to Alessandro Russo's interpretation, which is more sympathetic to the Red Guards, and places more blame on the state, could the Cultural Revolution have gone in a better direction if it had not begun with the purges of state officials from above, and if the masses had been given power to act autonomously from the state much earlier? Personally, I'm not so convinced. Did the rebels of the Cultural Revolution adopt the practices of dismissal against each other and shift their goals towards the seizure of power simply because of Mao Zedong and the practices of the state? Or is dismissal indicative of a much deeper problem? Is dismissal really a statist mentality or a human mentality? Is the self-destructive behavior of dismissal just part of human nature? Or is it more just deeply conditioned into human behavior due to humans living under state authorities for centuries? Consider that China is one of the oldest civilizations, with much of its population living under authoritarian states for centuries. One could easily interpret all of these events of the Cultural Revolution as a lesson as to why human nature makes emancipatory politics impossible. However, one can also argue that as products of our socioeconomic conditions, humans emulate the logics and habits that they inherit from their society and its overlords. These are quite important questions that I encourage you to interrogate, because they force us to confront the critical dilemmas that a revolutionary politics will likely face, which we have to actively choose to deal with, rather than solely blaming the failures of revolutionary movements on external causes such as imperialism, foreign coups, revisionist traitors, or corrupt totalitarian leaders who abuse their power. I don't claim to have the definitive answers to these questions, and I encourage you to comment your thoughts as to which interpretation you're more convinced by. But I have a few tentative hypotheses of my own, which we will briefly speculate on here. Ressentiment, dismissal, and cancel culture. As part of his theory of slave morality and ressentiment, Friedrich Nietzsche argued that those who are the most impotent have the greatest thirst for power. But most people repress their will to power and cope with their impotence by adopting a form of religious ideology that they use as a veil to turn their powerlessness into a virtue, and morally denounce those who do have power.
The pleasure of power derives from the displeasure experienced 100 times of dependency, of impotence. If this experience is lacking, then that pleasure is absent as well.
Given how the Cultural Revolution panned out, perhaps Nietzsche was onto something when he predicted that those who have the least power can sometimes be the most dangerous and destructive when getting a taste of it. You could see this logic of ressentiment at play when it came to the obsession with weaponizing the label of bourgeois as a moral category and the glorification of so-called proletarian culture, which popularized the terrible stereotype of communism being a poverty cult. After tirelessly going after party bureaucrats...
Sorry, I had to run to deal with something with my mom, but this is literally my favorite part of this video. We finally got to it, which is, of course, the thing that I absolutely fucking hate, because it's like paired up in the Western world with a very liberal...
and running out of
it's paired up in the...
to persecute. The Red Guards soon turned on each other in a bitter power struggle. The phenomenon that we call dismissal, the enjoyment in determining the fate of others, is at the heart of what we call cancel culture. The Cultural Revolution shows that the phenomenon at play in what we today call cancel culture is not a strictly online phenomenon.
Okay, so what I was trying to explain Oh my God. Anne yeter ne olur Allah aşkına. Okay. What I was trying to describe is that in the Western world, this exact same phenomenon is also doubly bastardized because it's bastardized to a degree where it's also liberal. So it has like all of the worst liberal aesthetics associated with socialism, but then people who are personally pushing this kind of politics do it on liberal boundaries that liberals have placed upon what it means to be a socialist. And they do this exact same fucking thing.
Or something new. Cancel culture is a term that is often abused, and people tend to use it to describe very different things. I personally don't think cases of famous people just facing criticism for provocative things that they said is really cancel culture. No, J.K. Rowling and Dave Chappelle aren't really cancelled. I think the main problem that's actually important in the phenomenon that we describe as cancel culture pertains to the moral policing of sociopolitical spaces and so-called communities, in which people in the in-group are dogpiled and dismissed from it due to not adhering to a certain moral purity of that in-group. This is why I prefer the term dismissal instead of cancel culture when referring to this problem of in-group policing, because it is not necessarily a new thing. And it's a real self-destructive tendency that must be dealt with if any political movement wants to thrive without imploding. This practice of dismissal, which typically involves a pseudo-politics of identity and the adherence to certain moral expectations, can repress underlying differences that people are too scared to express, and can lead to the cannibalization of movements due to an unreasonable expectation of moral purity. If you want to see more as to how this phenomenon of dismissal in the Cultural Revolution relates to cancel culture, I highly recommend this excellent article by Asad Haider. The practice...
This is why leftists are way more prone to legitimately harming their own movements than anyone else. That's it. Because everybody thinks it's about like self-crit, and the reality is that it's not about self-criticism at all. It turns into this like weird ass purity spiral, and it ends up genuinely destroying coalition building and even expanding on a fucking movement.
Of dismissal must be contained or balanced by a politics of pluralization and creation that goes beyond the mere negation of things and is more tolerant to human differences and mistakes. Many people take a long time to adjust to change, and we can never all agree on everything. Class and the dictatorship of the proletariat. Last but not least, the final lesson of the Cultural Revolution concerns the question of class as a political category, and the viability of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The dictatorship of the proletariat is a key idea in Marxist theory that most Marxists subscribe to in some way, shape, or form. The basic idea with the dictatorship of the proletariat is that the socialist transition between capitalism and communism must be spearheaded by a state ruled by the previously exploited classes, namely the working class, in a coalition with the peasantry, who constitute the majority of the population that never had much of a say in bourgeois democracy. However, the experience of the Cultural Revolution revealed some additional issues with the dictatorship of the proletariat. In his book Mao's China and After, A History of the People's Republic, the historian Maurice Meisner eloquently sums up one of the most overlooked...
Weren't you complaining about ostensible leftists before this? Yeah, I was. I was complaining about them constantly fucking engaging in wrecker behavior. There's a difference. I think I practice what I preach on this matter because I usually refuse to talk about them when it comes to like being hypercritical of the shit that they say, just because I don't agree with it. And part of that is because I think that they still play a role in this larger puzzle. Like, for example, in the Ugopnik video, Ugopnik calls them filters, right? Or is that what he said? Or like people that try to stop you from moving to any other part of the pyramid, or tumors, not filters. Tumors. Like people that literally spend all of their time fighting, weirdly enough, fighting other leftists. Yes, that is something that should not occur. That is something that should not happen. It's a profoundly toxic behavior, and it was so toxic and so valuable that it was a infiltration method crafted by the fucking CIA and the FBI. Literally. The difference, of course, is that usually people that do that kind of thing inevitably show their real framework, what guides them, what actually motivates them. Oftentimes is money. For the most part, those people very quickly become like the why I left the left ass motherfuckers anyway. You know? The Tim Pools of the world. Tim Pool, when he was at Vice, was like a progressive liberal. You know, he presented himself as that. And then he actually genuinely created a career for himself by consistently using those bona fides to say that he actually is a centrist while simultaneously pumping right-wing agitated propaganda. There are plenty of people who do that and still maintain the presence that they are leftists. You know? There are a lot of people who do that because liberalism in and of itself is kind of boring to be on board with. You're basically saying, yeah, no, your dad's politics is my politics. That's why everybody looks for like very different. That's why everybody looks for like different kinds of ways of repackaging their politics often. To me, it is basically like the same inability that insecure people have in not recognizing Andrew Tate's glaring insecurity that he masks with machismo and bravado. Like the over-the-top machismo that he presents is unironically a way to just like soften or to hide the very real insecurities that he has. And that actually legitimately allows people, or that actually legitimately causes people to not see him as an insecure person because they themselves are also fucking very insecure. That same thing happens in leftist spaces as well. A lot of people do not understand wrecker behavior and often will engage in that kind of thing themselves. Engage in that wrecker behavior themselves to like destroy any kind of solidarity, any kind of movement building.
Issues of class in revolutionary China.
One of the ironies of China's post-revolutionary history, fully apparent during the Cultural Revolution, is that the revolutionaries drawn from the oppressed classes under the old regime tended to be socially and politically conservative under the new regime, increasingly so as the years went on, whereas the social and political radicals in liberated China tended to be the children of families who made up the privileged classes in pre-1949 China. It takes no great sociological insight to unravel the paradox.
Usually the one-time are the only ones who complain are also the ones who complain about gatekeeping or purity testing. Really? Are you trying to say that I'm a wrecker? Like, is that what you're trying to say? Gatekeeping in which direction? No, the same people who complain of tankies. Yeah, the thing is, like, obviously I have my lines. You know what I mean? I have my lines. I think, like, yeah, if you are a professional Nazi or you align with professional Nazis, yeah, it's going to take a lot for me to trust you, okay? If I catch you with a fucking literal Nazi hanging out, collaborating with them, giving them a platform thoughtlessly and carelessly, so, like even going to lengths where you defend them, it's over for me. Like there's nothing, like it's very, very, very hard to recover from that, in my opinion. A lot of people don't give a shit because they themselves also have like very malleable politics. They don't usually have a lot of they don't have a dog in the fight. They don't have like real stakes in the matter. They want a sense of belonging. They want to fucking be a part of a group. So they don't really think about that kind of thing. Or even if they find it to be like a little weird and gross, they they even if they find it a little bit weird and gross, they can kind of overlook it for other reasons, right? Point is, like, I'm not saying that I don't have a real, I don't have any firm boundaries at all, right? I'll talk to most people, especially normies, right? But if I'm talking to a professional propagandist who also is like a straight up Nazi or white supremacist, then, I'm going to be very careful. In my opinion, I always weigh the consequences. Like, am I offering this person a larger platform? Is this person going to benefit tremendously from this, even if I ritualistically humiliate them? You know what I mean? Because some people do actually gain a tremendous amount of reward from simply being platformed, right? So there are definitely boundaries. It's understandable. It doesn't mean that like anyone is like totally valid and allowed. But yeah. Anyway.
Revolutionaries, who came mostly from the poorer peasantry and the working class, were, along with their children, favored for political positions, educational opportunities, and employment after 1949. They enjoyed an unaccustomed high social status under the new regime. The children of former capitalists, ex-landlords, and intellectuals, on the other hand, labored under various forms of social, economic, and political discrimination, and nowhere more than in the educational system. Whereas those who could claim lowly class origins, at least those among them with access to political power, had a conservative stake in the post-revolutionary order and its new inequalities, the offspring of the former ruling classes were the new underprivileged. It is hardly surprising that the latter responded so enthusiastically to radical Maoist critiques of bureaucratic privilege and calls for greater equality, while the former rallied to the defense of the party and channeled their revolutionary energies into assaults against the offspring of the formerly privileged social classes.
Given this rather paradoxical outcome, it is not a surprise that Mao was so fixated on rethinking the dictatorship of the proletariat in his final years before his death. It is clear that one of the key lessons to be drawn from the Cultural Revolution is that the dictatorship of the proletariat is a concept that needs to be rethought and reformulated. I also believe that Mao Zedong was correct in identifying a bureaucratic stasis and decline in revolutionary creativity amongst the party elite. The party and the masses needed to get politicized again to not forget their original revolutionary mission to bring about the emancipation and socialist transformation of society, albeit a bit more gradually. However, unlike Mao, I do not believe that the answer to revitalizing the revolutionary transition to socialism is to simply keep intensifying class struggle, but rather to continuously facilitate the creation of new alternative socialist structures and organizations that are more desirable to capitalist ones. Class struggle and endlessly purging bureaucrats does not necessarily lead to a politics of creation. By itself, class struggle just leads to a self-destructive identity politics of negation. Of course, class struggle is absolutely necessary during the period where there's, actual classes. But class struggle without a clearly defined political antidote can have a highly depoliticizing effect. When class becomes an identitarian category expanded to encompass certain attitudes, it is easy to weaponize it to mask what are really just political differences. Kinda like how Stalin used terms such as bourgeois and kulak to describe all of his enemies and frame what was really just an attempt to remove political opposition to his line as a moral anti-revisionist crusade for the proletariat. During the Cultural Revolution, Red Guards did something similar to justify their actions when battling each other for power. Egalitarian organizations cannot truly operate successfully independently from the state unless the people reject and overcome the logic of dismissal in favor of pluralization. I am of the opinion that the self-destructive tendency of dismissal can be overcome and unlearned, but gradually. In the meantime, it must be contained through democratic legal institutions. Mao really did want to give power to the people, but he had zero plan as to how this power would be mediated. Vague ideas of radical democracy.
Cringe. Kulaks as a class was definitely by their private ownership of the land. It wasn't imaginary. Brother, the point isn't that like there were private ownership, there were private owners of land. The point is, using that as a mechanism of pushback against anyone and everyone that you deemed was not sufficiently loyal to you or to the goals that you had. It's just like, the point is utilizing, like, I mean, the entire part of this is utilizing class as not a real Marxist in the real Marxist sense, but instead redefining it as like something that is aesthetic. And once it's something that is aesthetic, ultimately turning around and slapping that sticker on to any person. Like, it, in a way, it's no different than what I've talked about quite a bit with respect to top of the hour ad break. That's right. There's a class of people who are subscribed and they don't see the top of the hour ad break. And then there are those who do see the top of the hour ad break because they are unsubscribed, because they do not have $5. But don't worry, you probably have a Twitch Prime, and therefore you can subscribe for free. Here's the 3-minute ad break now. It is doing good guys versus bad guys, except the capitalists are bad guys, the socialists are the good guys. Kind of. It's one of the reasons why I regularly talk about unions for players in sports, right? Like, under a liberal hegemonic structure, you automatically assume that, like, oh, someone is wealthy or someone is rich, which means, like, oh, that's bourgeois. That person is bourgeois. There is this way of mystifying class politics where you go, oh, rich equals capital owner, poor equals worker. You could be a relatively poor capital owner and you can be a rich worker. Okay. I'm gonna end the broadcast soon because of this. I'm gonna be honest. I just that's one more motherfucker. I already gave you guys the rundown. I have this. I have the offline TV Fear Pong challenge video, and I have Okay Buddy. If you fucking keep asking me for a role play right now, that's a huge deal, and you should repeat it all the time. What, at the top of the hour ad break? I swear to God. I swear to God, dude. I'm gonna fucking turn this goddamn car around. Please. Please, guys. I love you all, and I really respect the gaming watchers, but please. I'm in the middle of this. It's almost done. Please.
Decentralization, or simply just giving power to the people, are common intuitive antidotes that you often hear in
Fuck. God damn it. The point I was trying to make is that it unironically turns into revisionism that is unproductive. Okay? It's about the ways in which you generate your wealth, I guess. Are you selling your wage labor, or are you actually getting others to work for you? Now, under our current global financialized, especially financialized global capitalism, the lines get muddier and muddier. Okay? But the reason why I talk about player unions for athletic competitions is because a lot of those guys, sure, they make a lot of money in the aftermath of their careers from, going and buying like a pizza chain or some shit, at which point they become capital owners. But throughout their career, the major revenue that they build for themselves, the major amount of money that they make is through their wage labor. Okay? So on that sense, they are workers. Whereas your small business owning father that has a hard time making ends meet is a capital owner. Okay? This is the reason why your small business owning father might have a different perspective on politics than even a players union beneficiary, a basketball player, let's say, that has a contract that nets him, I don't know, a couple $1 million a year. Because ultimately, what people fail to forget is that your HVAC business owner stepdad is a small business owner and therefore is generating value by extracting the surplus labor value of other workers underneath him. Okay? Versus the player might be making a shit ton of money, but they are actually generating value for someone else that is making an even larger amount of money. It's about the relationship that one has with the means of production, more so than the amount of money they generate off of, or the value placed upon their labor, or the amount of money they make. This is something that I try to describe to people all the time, but because of where I'm at in my career, it comes across as self-serving. The irony, of course, is that I used to make this exact same argument when I was fucking broke. And a lot of people, specifically like online Maoist third worldists on Twitter or ultras or whatever, like, you know, baby leftists who oftentimes are the loudest and the most like purity spiral driven, cannot comprehend that. Okay? They can't understand it. They can't understand that what they're doing is pure liberalism. Which is precisely the reason why what they say mirrors the Fox News article writers that say the exact same shit about me. Like, oh, he's socialist but has a fucking house. The fuck? Get out of here. Or the supposed liberals in some communities that fucking hound me and my fans on a regular basis about how he didn't have to buy a $3 million house. He could have bought a $1 million house. We would have been perfectly fine with that. Like, no, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. And regardless, it has nothing to do with whatever the fuck I'm purchasing anyway. Okay?
Response to the problems of state authoritarianism and bureaucratic centralization in actually existing state socialist countries. However, as we have seen in the Cultural Revolution, people are capable of being just as authoritarian towards each other without the help of any state authorities. Mob justice, without any institutional framework to regulate it, is sometimes no better than state tyranny. I think that many liberal theorists and early thinkers of the Enlightenment were correct to be skeptical of the masses and how they can issue their own kind of tyranny. Except the difference is that liberal thinkers, unlike Marxists and communists, did not consider or even try to emancipate the masses from their own economic servitude. The socioeconomic conditions must be created to maximize human evolution and emancipate human potential for as many people as possible. In this regard, Marxism tries to carry the torch of the Enlightenment. Conclusions and critical reflections. The Cultural Revolution encourages us to reflect more on the tensions and risks of an egalitarian mass movement that seeks to create power outside of the state, independent.
I caught a guy on that today. He shifted the goalpost. If he really liked poor people, then he wouldn't live with rich people in LA. What a wonderful thing to say. If someone has a reactionary perspective like that, ask them why they think Los Angeles is a crime-ridden city where there are homeless people in every fucking city block. And then watch them try to go back on that take as well. Because guess what? If I lived in some bumfuck part of Iowa, I would be genuinely in actual proximity from poor people. Okay? Part of the reason why I like living in Los Angeles is because I do have a proximity to a diversity of different backgrounds, including financial circumstances, including fucking homeless people. Okay? I like living in a city for that reason. And that's precisely the ones who fucking say that shit live in the goddamn suburbs. They live in the motherfucking suburbs in a house that is damn near identical to this house, except because they're in the fucking suburbs of Iowa, it doesn't fucking matter. That's it. I lived here when I was broke too. Okay? I lived here when I was broke. I like living here.
Independently from the party, reflecting on the experience of the Cultural Revolution and pondering solutions to the problems that it posed are quite important for so-called anti-authoritarian libertarian socialists who claim to believe in radical democracy, spontaneity, as opposed to a Leninist party seizing state power. Such reflections are equally useful for Marxist-Leninists who believe that communism can be built from above, as well as for Maoists who insist that elements of the Chinese revolutionary experience like the Cultural Revolution can simply be replicated elsewhere. The events of the Chinese Cultural Revolution simply do not leave us with a blueprint or model for revolutionary strategy. While Mao Zedong thought certainly has a lot of valuable insights, ultimately I believe the experience of the Cultural Revolution leaves us with far more questions than answers. Part of what makes the Cultural Revolution such a significant event is that it compels us to rethink what are some of the most basic premises of emancipatory politics. What is communism for? What specifically makes communism good? What exactly is the good society that we strive to create by abolishing all class distinctions? If the goal of emancipatory politics is to achieve freedom, then what are the conditions for freedom? And how can a revolutionary movement avoid bureaucratic ossification and give power to the people without it eating itself? Reinvigorating a politics of creation requires us to think the values and specific vision as to what the good society of communism ought to look like. One Dime is a fan-funded project, so if you get educational value out of my work, then your support on Patreon would mean a lot to me. Plus, by becoming a patron, you will get access to exclusive content and my private Discord server. In the latest exclusive podcast, I give a summary of the main books that I got my information from for this video, and a little guide as to how to
What? It is not that relationship protections are irrelevant, it's that you have to understand what class privilege means. It is fine that you have an expensive house, it is inspiring, but since you do, will you tend to protect your wealth? It informs the analysis. If I was a sex worker, I would of course protect my interests. If I was a slave, yeah, except what you're saying is profoundly fucking stupid. Because one, it is not at odds. Like my home is not at odds with my ideology or what I believe in. That's number one. Just like a sex worker protecting sex work is not at odds with their ideology. What the fuck? If I was a slave and that was my only source of income, I would defend. It would even defend slavery. Is so funny because slavery has no fucking income. It's done under coercive conditions. So to compare a sex worker protecting sex work or defending sex work, or to compare me defending ownership of a house, a fundamental right, I believe, that should be given to every single human unconditionally, is ridiculous. You're making an argument for the sake of making an argument at that point, and it's a bad one. Anyway, something to consider. That's just such aesthetic politics that make rich people in Oklahoma look like they're with the people while advocating ostensibly for the opposite of what Hasan stands for. Exactly. Something I brought up quite a bit is like the Ted Cruz AOC phenomena. Okay? AOC is brown, the brown Latina from fucking from New York. So she is presented as this like bi-coastal elitist. Ted Cruz, on the other hand, wears his snakeskin boots and is from Texas, yeehaw, and he is seen as a person who has the interests of the working class. Okay? That is just pure aesthetics. It's just pure fucking aesthetics. That's it. And a lot of people eat that shit up. It's also the same way. It's also the exact same way in which, like, what's his face gets a good fuck. My brain is broken at the end of this 6-hour process. Jesus Christ. It's also at the heart of the same. It's like Warren Buffett. Okay, Warren Buffett gets a lot of play for like living in the same home that he lived in, despite being a fucking billionaire and driving the same shitty ass car. And it's like, bro, he's Warren Buffett, dog.